Welcome to Nazir Fears.
Like, subscribe, share, and click that bell icon.
The Shifting Sands. Aidan, Jess, and Sarah had always been the adventurous type, seeking out new places to explore and mysterious lands to uncover. So when Aidan found the old beachside cottage, nestled between the high cliffs and the rocky shore, it seemed like the perfect weekend getaway. The quiet, isolated beach was miles away from the nearest town, far from the usual tourist crowds that plagued the coastlines of the city. This was their chance to disconnect, to live simply for a while, and escape the stresses of their daily lives. The trio arrived on a Friday afternoon, the sun still high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the vast stretch of sand that lay before them. The cottage was modest, tucked under the shadow of a towering cliff, with an old wooden fence that creaked in the wind. The air smelled of salt water and earth, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled the otherwise silent environment. A sense of peace settled over them as they unloaded their bags and set up their temporary home. Over the next few hours they explored the beach. The sand was soft and warm, the water inviting but slightly too cold for a dip. The shoreline stretched for miles, the ocean a deep blue, its waves crashing rhythmically against the jagged rocks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the group settled around a small campfire, roasting marshmallows and reminiscing about old memories. The glow of the fire flickered across their faces as they laughed, savoring the calm and the stillness of the place. But as the night deepened and the fire burned lower, a strange feeling crept over them. It wasn't immediate, but subtle. Jess, who had always been the most sensitive to changes in the environment, was the first to speak up. "Do you guys feel that?" she asked, looking around the beach, her eyes scanning the darkness. The sky was now pitch black, save for the faint starlight above them. Aidan paused mid-laugh, glancing over at her. "What do you mean? It's just the night settling in. Everything's fine." But Jess didn't seem convinced. She rubbed her arms, her eyes narrowed, as though she was searching for something hidden in the shadows. "I don't know, it's like the air feels heavier, almost like something's here with us." Sarah, always the skeptic, laughed it off. "You're imagining things. It's just the quiet of the beach. No cars, no people, no noise. It messes with your head." Jess shook her head but didn't say anything more. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The night passed in uneasy silence. The wind began to pick up, sending the smoke from the fire swirling, as though pushing it away from the group. Every now and then, they heard the distant sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. But there was something off about it, like the ocean was a little too loud, a little too close. Jess tried to brush it off as just her imagination. But when she closed her eyes, she could have sworn she heard whispers carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. The next morning, Sarah was the first to wake. She stepped outside the cottage and stood for a moment on the porch, looking out at the beach. The light of dawn was breaking over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the sand. But as she took in the view, something caught her eye. A series of strange patterns in the sand, like footprints, but not human. They were too large, too erratic. They circled back and forth in odd formations, leading toward the cliffs, then disappearing into the distance. She called to the others, but as they arrived, the patterns in the sand appeared even stranger. Aidan crouched down, running his hand over the marks. "Looks like someone, or something, has been walking around," he said, his brow furrowed. "I don't know," Jess said, a chill running down her spine. "These weren't here last night. I'm sure of it." Sarah, trying to calm her nerves, brushed it off. "It's probably just the tide, or some animal running around. No big deal." But Jess wasn't convinced. The patterns felt deliberate, like they had been made by something that wasn't natural. The three of them stood in silence for a few moments, the wind whispering through the trees, until Aiden spoke up. "Well, we're here now. Let's make the most of it. We've got the whole day to explore." Despite Jess's misgivings, the group decided to take a walk along the shore, following the strange patterns in the sand. As they walked deeper into the beach, they came upon a large, weathered rock outcropping. The cliffs towered above them, casting long shadows over the sand. They climbed up to the rock formation, and, from the top, they could see the entire beach laid out before them. The scene looked peaceful from this vantage point, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But then, something caught Sarah's attention. A dark shape, moving along the edge of the cliff. It was hard to make out, but it was definitely a figure. A person or animal, it wasn't clear. The figure moved in jerky, unnatural motions, its limbs swaying oddly. Sarah blinked and rubbed her eyes, but when she looked again, it was gone. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with unease. "See what?" Aiden replied, scanning the horizon. There was nothing there. "I swear I saw something moving along the cliffs," she said, but no one else had seen it. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. The strange feeling from the previous night continued to hang in the air, growing heavier as the sun began to set once again. The group returned to the cottage, their nerves on edge, but no one spoke about the figure they had seen or hadn't seen. That evening, as they gathered around the campfire once more, Jess couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in her chest. The whispers on the wind seemed louder now, more persistent. It felt like the very ground beneath them was shifting, changing, as though the beach itself was alive and watching them. "I don't know how much longer I can stay here," Jess said quietly, her voice barely audible above the wind. "This place, it feels wrong." Aiden tried to reassure her. "You're just tired. It's been a long day, and the isolation is messing with your mind. Just get some rest, and we'll leave tomorrow if you're still not feeling it." But Jess wasn't so sure. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the wind howling outside. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the trees felt like it was coming from something far worse than nature. It felt like the beach itself was trying to draw them in, pull them deeper into its strange, unknowable depths. In the dead of night, Jess was woken by a sound she couldn't explain, a scraping, dragging sound coming from outside the cabin. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest, and peered out of the window into the dark. The moonlight revealed nothing but the empty beach, the still ocean, and the same distant cliffs. But as she lay back down, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread, she heard it again. A scraping, like something heavy dragging across the sand. Slowly, she got out of bed and tiptoed toward the window, her breath caught in her throat. And that's when she saw it. In the distance, just beyond the reach of the firelight, a shadowy figure was moving across the beach, dragging something heavy behind it. The figure didn't walk. It seemed to glide, its movements slow and deliberate. The sound of dragging continued as the figure moved in a circle, back and forth, just like the patterns they had found in the sand earlier. Jess's heart raced as she backed away from the window. She was about to wake the others when the door to the cabin creaked open behind her. Aidan and Sarah stood in the doorway, their faces pale. "Jess?" "We saw it too," Aidan said, his voice trembling. "It's not just in your head. Something's out there." As the night wore on, the wind howled louder, and the figure on the beach continued its slow, eerie ritual. And in the distance, the symbols in the sand began to shift once more, the patterns changing as if guided by an unseen hand. The group realized then, whatever had once lived on this beach, whatever ancient force had called them here, was now awake, and they were trapped in its shifting sands, with no way to escape. The next morning, the beach was empty. The figures, the symbols, everything was gone, like it had never existed. The sand was smooth and undisturbed, as if they had imagined the entire thing. But Jess knew better. As they left, she could feel the beach watching them, and she knew that one day it would call them back. The Drowned Village. Claire had always been fascinated by the sea. Growing up near the coast, she spent countless afternoons walking along the beach, collecting seashells and watching the tide roll in and out. The ocean was vast and mysterious, and no matter how much she learned about it, she felt it always had secrets left to reveal. It was no surprise, then, when Claire, now an adult, decided to spend a few weeks exploring the isolated beaches of an old, forgotten part of the coast. This remote stretch of beach was rarely visited, and local legends told of a sunken village somewhere beneath the waves. But to Claire, it was simply the perfect place to escape and reconnect with the wonders of the natural world. She arrived at the small town by the sea early one morning. The town was sleepy and quiet, with few tourists around. The air was heavy with salt and brine, and the smell of old wood and seaweed filled her lungs as she checked into a small bed and breakfast. The owner, a frail old woman with a weathered face, seemed wary of Claire's arrival. "Not many come here, dear," the woman warned, her voice low and thick with a regional accent. "The village is long gone, swallowed by the sea. Some folks say it's still there, though, buried beneath the waves. But you won't find much here. Just a quiet beach and an old town that used to be." Claire smiled politely. "That's exactly what I'm looking for. Peace and solitude, and maybe a bit of adventure," she added with a playful wink. The woman didn't seem to share her enthusiasm, and Claire couldn't help but notice the faint unease in her eyes. But she brushed it off, thinking it was just a superstitious old woman who was too set in her ways. The next day, Claire set out to explore the beach, armed with her camera and a notebook for documenting anything she found. The ocean was calm, the air cool, and the scent of the sea filled her senses. As she walked along the shore, her eyes scanning the horizon, she saw something strange, an object half buried in the sand. Curious, she knelt down and uncovered an old, rotting piece of wood. It was a fragment of something larger, perhaps part of an old shipwreck or a forgotten piece of the village's past. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized she had stumbled upon a relic. As the days went by, Claire continued her search. The sun would set, casting long shadows across the beach, and the tides would change, revealing more of the buried remnants. Pieces of broken pottery, rusted nails, and the faint outline of stone foundations poked through the shifting sands. But it was what she found on the third day that made her pause, feeling a chill crawl down her spine. Walking along the beach, Claire noticed a pattern in the sand, a series of small indentations leading into the water. The marks seemed too symmetrical to be natural, almost as if they had been carefully arranged. Following them with cautious steps, she reached a point where the sand seemed to give way to something harder. She knelt down and brushed the sand away. What she uncovered was an old stone doorway, half submerged in the ocean. It looked ancient, worn by centuries of water erosion, yet still intact enough to suggest that it had once been part of something much larger. Her heart pounded as she realized she had found a part of the village that had been submerged for years, possibly centuries. Her excitement was tempered by an unsettling feeling, a sense that she was trespassing in a place that had been abandoned for a reason. But curiosity outweighed her fear, and she quickly snapped photos and jotted notes in her journal, her mind racing with questions. That evening she returned to the bed and breakfast, her mind full of the day's discoveries. She was eager to learn more, to find out what had caused the village to sink beneath the waves. But as she sat down to a quiet dinner, the old woman approached her with a grave expression. "You've found it, haven't you?" the woman asked softly, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Claire looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in the woman's demeanor. "The village? Yes, I've found some remnants. It's amazing. But I still don't understand how it all disappeared." The woman leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't the sea that took it. At least, not entirely." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" The woman hesitated, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder before speaking again. "There's a legend, a story passed down by the old ones. They say that the village was built over a sacred place, a place where the sea god's anger was kept at bay. But when the villagers began to take from the ocean without offering their respect, they angered the god. The village sank into the sea as punishment." Claire laughed nervously, thinking it was just another local myth. "You don't really believe that, do you?" The woman's face grew serious, her eyes dark with fear. "You shouldn't be out there anymore. The ocean doesn't forget, and neither do the spirits of those who drowned. I've heard them, voices on the wind, whispers from the deep. They're not at peace, and they'll make sure you aren't either." Claire shook her head, dismissing the woman's warnings. It was just superstition, nothing more. She didn't believe in spirits or gods, only the tangible, the real. But that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the sea. The wind howled outside, and the waves crashed harder than usual, as though the ocean was angry, as though it wanted to tell her something. The next day, Claire returned to the site of the submerged doorway. The tide had receded, revealing more of the stone structure, and she eagerly waded into the shallow water to get a better look. As she worked to clear more sand from the ancient stones, she felt a sudden shift beneath her feet. The ground seemed to shift, the sand suddenly sinking beneath her, and she stumbled forward, barely managing to catch herself against the cold stone. As she stood there, panting, she looked around. The sky had darkened, and the winds were picking up again. She could hear the faintest whispers, as if the sea was speaking directly to her. Her heart raced, but she pushed on, determined to uncover the mystery of the village. But as the whispers grew louder, a chill settled over her. The water around her feet seemed to rise, inching higher and higher, until it was up to her knees. And that's when she saw them. Shapes beneath the water, moving slowly, almost deliberately. Figures, ghostly pale shapes, like the remnants of people who had once lived in the village, but now only existed in the depths. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her heart pounding in terror. The shapes moved closer, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She turned and ran, But the water began to rise faster, pulling her toward the sea. The whispers became voices, urgent and angry, calling her name. "Get out!" one voice shouted, its tone pleading, desperate. "Leave! Before it's too late!" another voice hissed, its words dripping with malice. Claire's legs burned as she ran toward the shore, but the water continued to rise, pulling her back toward the ocean. As she reached the safety of the beach, she turned to look back, gasping for air. The sea had claimed its prize, the spirits of the drowned village now awake and furious. The once tranquil beach now seemed hostile, alive with a dark, ancient force. That night, as Claire packed her belongings to leave, the whispers followed her, carried on the wind. The ocean seemed to call her, its voice echoing in the back of her mind, a warning she couldn't ignore. She left the beach the next morning, but the vision of the drowned village, the angry spirits, and the rising tide stayed with her, haunting her dreams. The ocean had reclaimed its secret, and Claire knew she would never return. The lighthouse keeper's secret. Tom had always been drawn to isolation. After years of living in the chaotic buzz of city life, the chance to retreat to a remote island and care for an abandoned lighthouse seemed like a perfect opportunity to reset. The position was simple enough: maintain the lighthouse, check the beacon, keep the place tidy, and monitor the weather. The pay wasn't extravagant, but for Tom, it was the peace he craved. The lighthouse stood tall and weathered on a rocky, secluded island off the coast, surrounded by jagged cliffs and the vast, endless sea. The town nearest to the island was small, with only a handful of houses scattered along the shoreline. A tiny ferry operated infrequently, but aside from that, the island and its towering structure were left to the mercy of nature. It was the perfect place to disappear from the world for a while. As Tom made his way across the waves to the island for the first time, the journey seemed surreal. The salty air, the soft hum of the ferry cutting through the water, and the swaying of the boat made him feel like he was entering another world. The lighthouse loomed larger as he approached, its white paint chipped from years of exposure to salt and storms, but its presence still imposing against the backdrop of the churning sea. The beacon, dormant for years, stood silent. When the ferry docked and Tom stepped onto the rocky island, the first thing he noticed was the silence. No traffic, no chatter, just the wind, the crash of the waves against the rocks, and the occasional call of a seabird in the distance. He made his way to the lighthouse and settled into the small, austere keeper's quarters. The room was small, barely enough space for a bed, a desk, and a small wood stove. There were maps of the island pinned to the walls, weathered and faded. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. The place hadn't been inhabited for years, and it showed in the decaying wood and the faint smell of mildew that lingered in the air. That evening, after unpacking, Tom took a walk around the lighthouse, trying to familiarize himself with his new home. The wind whipped around him, cold and biting, and the ocean seemed restless as the waves crashed against the cliffside. He stood at the edge of the rocks, looking out over the water, feeling small against the vastness of the sea. There was something tranquil about the place, but something else, too, something unsettled. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. Later that night, as the storm clouds gathered over the horizon and rain began to fall, Tom retired to the keeper's quarters. The howl of the wind and the rhythmic pounding of the waves below echoed through the walls, and the faint creaks of the old lighthouse gave an unsettling vibe, as though it were alive. It wasn't long before Tom heard it. At first it was just a faint thud, like something small falling on the stone floor. He turned his head, his heart skipping a beat. He stood still for a moment, straining to hear. There was nothing but the storm outside. He convinced himself it was just the wind or the building settling. But then, a louder noise came, this time from the stairwell leading up to the lantern room. A thud, followed by what sounded like a slow, dragging sound. It was faint, but it was there. Tom's pulse quickened as he grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the stairwell. He hesitated for a moment, but the need to investigate overpowered his fear. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the narrow staircase, winding upward toward the lantern room. As he climbed, the noise continued, now sounding like footsteps. Tom stopped midway, holding his breath, waiting for the next sound. His eyes darted around, but the beam of light revealed nothing but the empty stone walls. His mind raced, thinking of every possibility, but he found no answer. Just the storm, he whispered to himself. Just the wind. But when he reached the top, the light at the lantern room flickered. The air was colder than before, and the beam from the lighthouse cast strange shadows across the room. Tom stepped forward, his heart pounding. His fingers gripped the railing as he checked the light mechanism. Everything seemed fine, but the coldness lingered, pressing in on him. That night, Tom lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The wind howled outside, louder now, and the lighthouse creaked under the strain of the storm. His eyes flicked to the dark corners of the room, the shadows seeming to stretch unnaturally. Was it the storm playing tricks on him, or was it something else? Something he couldn't explain. The next morning, Tom went about his usual duties, checking the light, inspecting the oil, and making sure the beacon was functioning properly. But as he walked through the lighthouse, the strange feeling of being watched never left him. He checked every room, but no one was there. There was no explanation. That afternoon, while searching through the keeper's quarters for supplies, Tom stumbled upon something strange. An old journal tucked away in the back of a dusty drawer. It was leather-bound, yellowed with age, and the pages were filled with scribbled handwriting. Tom pulled it out, flipping through the entries. Most of it was mundane, listing daily weather conditions and logs of lighthouse maintenance. But as he got further into the pages, the entries grew more erratic. His heart raced as he read the following entry. I hear them now. They come from the sea. I feel them watching me, waiting. The fog rolls in thicker each night. They whisper in the dark, and I am afraid. I hear their voices in the wind, but I cannot leave. The light is my only protection. I must keep it shining. The sea will claim me if I let it go dark. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He flipped through more pages, the words growing more frantic and paranoid. The journal entries spoke of strange figures on the shore, shadows in the mist, and voices coming from the waves. The last entry, scrawled hastily across the page, sent a chill down Tom's spine. The light is dying. I cannot keep it up anymore. They are here, the Watchers. I can hear their footsteps on the stairs. The storm is coming. The sea will take me. It will take us all. Tom slammed the journal shut, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He looked around the room, his eyes wide. The storm had been intensifying all day, and the wind was now howling through the lighthouse. The power flickered, casting the room into darkness before the light came back on. The beam of the lighthouse swept across the rocky cliffs, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The fog, which had been rolling in thick all day, seemed to have a presence, as if it were alive. That night, Tom sat in the keeper's quarters, staring out of the window at the churning sea. His thoughts raced, wondering if he had made a mistake by coming here. Suddenly he heard it, the sound of footsteps on the stairs again, soft but deliberate. He jumped up, rushing toward the lantern room. As he reached the top, he looked out into the dark sea. The fog had thickened, and he could see nothing beyond the lighthouse's reach. But then, from the mist, a figure emerged. Tall and thin, cloaked in the fog, it stood just beyond the light's beam, its face hidden by the mist. It was as if the figure had been waiting for the light to reveal it. The figure moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the base of the lighthouse. Tom's heart pounded as the figure reached the stairs, its form blurry and indistinct. But Tom couldn't move. He was frozen, his eyes fixed on the figure as it slowly ascended the steps, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure reached the top, standing in front of Tom, who couldn't speak. It stepped forward, and Tom felt his body freeze. The figure reached out its hand, skeletal, ghostly, and Tom felt his heart stop. But before the figure could touch him, the lighthouse's light flickered out. The room plunged into darkness. The figure was gone. The storm outside raged as Tom stood, frozen, in the darkened lighthouse. The silence was deafening. He knew he was no longer alone.